So I want to welcome everybody to our weekly webinar. Today is February 24th, 2022. Obviously, a lot of crazy things happening in the world with Russia and Ukraine and all that. But what we'll talk about in this webinar really are four things. And let me pop this up on the screen. Just maybe help us stay focused here on what we are going to cover. So here are the four things. Last week we talked about this list of sort of alternative credit reports or credit bureaus, and I had a little sheet, but I had trouble sharing that with you. So I want to give you that now. So let me share this with you, and you should be able to download this now. If you're on your phone or you're driving, just email me and I'll send it to you. This is just a simple PDF, and let me show you what this looks like. And so I think most of you are familiar with pulling your major credit reports, Equifax, Experian, and Trans Union. It's just a little sheet to print out to then write, okay, I've got my Equifax, here's when I got it, I've disputed it, here are the results. But the main part are these alternative credit bureaus. And I just listed here maybe 8 of these, and there's more, and we talked about these last week. And what I wanted you to be able to do is to have this little form or something similar you can make on your own, just to sort of keep track of this, okay? And then I wanted to share my experience and then get what you guys have experienced if you've made any calls or gone online to try to pull your reports. So I called Clarity, and they said they could not find my file. Either they don't have a file on me, or I recently moved and that may be it. So they said, mail something off to them, and I'll probably do that. And then I called Innovis or Innovis, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And this was actually interesting. I've requested this for clients before. We've always done that in writing. But with this, it's just by phone, and really just, saying, hey, I want to request my credit report, and you put in your personal information. And if they find you, then they say, yep, we found you. We'll send you your credit report. So I am curious if you guys were able to have any luck on any of these, whether it's NCTUE or LexisNexis, Innovis, CoreLogic, Teletrack, FactorTrust, DataX, Clarity. Were you able to call any of these? And if you have, tell me the experience. Was it, did it make sense? Was it difficult? Were they nice? I'll say the person at Clarity was very nice, very professional. And so no complaints about that. And if you haven't called, I would just try and call over this next week, and I think I put on here to maybe call one of these places a day or one a week, and then they'll mail you the document. And then let's start looking at those together. I really want this to be a collaborative, interactive process where, we put some of these up on the screen and say, okay, let's look at them. Are these reports missing data? Do they have inaccuracies in them? Kind of like we did the previous 2 weeks with the big credit reports, Equifax, Experian, and Trans Union. Let's see. We've got John said he opted out of LexisNexis. They confirmed. Flurry said NCTU, CoreLogic, really nice experience. Stay Focused said NCTUE, no luck with that. So let me say this, not all of these sort of alternative credit reports will have a file on you. Some of them are very specific. Do you have insurance claims? Have you taken out online loans or payday loans or certain other types of things? Remember the list we went through last week. I mean, there's stuff like if you're going to the casino to gamble, there's a credit report on you. Well, if you don't do that, there won't be a credit report on you because it's strictly related to the experience with sort of gaming companies, casinos, horse tracks, dog tracks, things like that. So not all of these places will have a credit report on you. So sometimes they may say, we just don't have a file. But if they have one, I think it's worth looking at. And you can always opt out of it later. But really you need to see what's in there before you say, hey, I'm freezing or opting out or anything like that. You want to know what's being reported on it. Let's see. So Johnny said, Innovis came up online, did not find any way to save it. That may be new, Johnny. I've always had them say that they're going to mail that to my clients. So you might just call them back and say, hey, I tried to get this online, had a problem. Can you mail it to me? John said it's a good idea to request to opt out. I'll say this, opting out probably, I didn't use the right terminology. You can freeze a credit report. You can put a security freeze, but you can't necessarily opt out. Like you can't say, hey, Equifax, I don't want you to have a report on me. They're going to have a report on you. Same thing with these bureaus. So I would not really freeze the account. I would first get it and let's look at it. Let's see what it says. It might be perfect. It might be 100% accurate, or it may be filled with errors. If it's filled with errors, dispute them. And if they don't get fixed, then you sue them. Okay. So really, we want to know what's in those reports first. And then we can each individually decide, hey, do I want to freeze it? Do I want to, dispute it? What do I want to do with it? Let's see. George said, LexisNexis risk, very nice. Submit a request. They said take 3 to 4 weeks. Okay. It's a little longer than, usually we're told. So they might come actually earlier. Most of the time they say like 5 to 10 business days, which I guess that's, a couple of 3 weeks, depending on, exactly how you count things. Let's see. Murley says, are the government authorized reports? So, and then she says, I thought only Equifax, Experian, and Trans Union were permitted by government. So there are no bureaus that are necessarily permitted by the government or authorized. It's just the Fair Credit Reporting Act says, if you are going to be a credit bureau, then here are the requirements you have to follow. And so all of these are supposed to be following the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And that's why they're in that CFPB report that we looked at last week, along with, I don't know, maybe 40 other credit bureaus. So, and that's not even, remotely all the credit bureaus out there. There are tons of credit bureaus, but these are kind of the more major ones after the big three. And let's see. So, okay. Sounds like, you've made some phone calls or done it online, and I would just keep doing that. Then when you get those reports, let me know, if you want me to put those up and let's look at them together. I'll redact out the personal information. I'm happy to do that. And so let me switch back to kind of our little agenda here. So we've covered the handout, the calling these places or going online, or you can mail to them. But the point is to get these credit reports coming to you so you can see. It's sort of like, do I have enough gas in my car? Well, if I don't have a gauge, I don't know. Do I have enough oil in my car? Well, if I can't pop the hood and, pull the stick out, or if I have a newer car, it might give me a percentage. But if we don't have a way to look at it, we just don't know if it's accurate. So I encourage you to look at these reports and look, I'm doing the same thing. Some of these I've looked at before, but a lot of these I've never looked at before. And so I'm curious to see how they report. So third thing I wanted to mention is, if you are free at 4:00 today, Central Time, we will be doing our legalese show. And in some ways, that's more geared toward folks in the credit repair profession. But really, we want it to be for anybody that has a question about credit reports or debt collectors or being sued. And Stephen Palmieri, who is in the credit repair space, has some software, some training for credit repair companies. He'll be on that. And then Blaine Dixon, a lawyer in Tennessee, and Blaine and I work together. He should be on it. He was supposed to be on it 2 weeks ago, but a court called. And, when the person with black robes says, hey, I need you to get down here, it kind of doesn't matter what your schedule is. So that's what happened last week. But hopefully Blaine will be able to be with us. And just you can catch that on my YouTube channel and, ask us any questions you want. And we'll just kind of have a free for all as far as any questions that you have. So the fourth item is really what the topic for today is. And I want to talk about how do we deal with collectors. And let me just stop this sharing here. And so originally I envisioned this sort of like any collection, any debt collector, debt buyer on your credit report, letter, whatever, we'd talk about it. But the more I thought about it, I really wanted to focus it in on just this. And that is sort of old-fashioned, sort of normal collection agencies, okay, that appear on your credit report. So these are not debt buyers. We're not talking about portfolio recovery, LV&V funding, Jefferson Capital, Midland Credit, none of those who claim to have bought the debt. We'll deal with those another time. Those typically involve credit card debt, auto deficiency loans, signature loans, if you do like a lending club type loan. But what I want to focus on would be the places that make no claim to buying the debt. They're just literally collecting on it. Almost all of those, at least on your major credit reports. We'll find out when we look at these other ones, but on Equifax, Experian, and Trans Union, and even Innovis, these are basically going to be medical debt or some type of telecommunication. So cable, internet, cell phone, that type of thing. And how do we handle those? And so that's what I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Let me just check our comments here. Yeah, so John mentioned something about opting out of LexisNexis because Experian said that's how they get information about the bankruptcy. In terms of, so let me just say this, and I don't want to get real involved in this because actually I've done some videos on this on YouTube and there's some cases on this. LexisNexis kind of wears two hats. Okay. One is as a credit bureau. Okay. The other hat that they wear is a vendor. So they provide work for credit bureaus. So Experian will hire LexisNexis to go look at the bankruptcy court records. You can do a security freeze. You can opt out. You can write every letter in the world to LexisNexis. It doesn't have any impact on them being a vendor. Okay. Just like, Equifax, John could call you and say, hey, we'll pay you, $100 if you go down to the federal courthouse and pull this information for us. You could do that. Okay. It doesn't mean you're a credit bureau. It just means you're working for them. You're a contractor for them. So it doesn't particularly have an impact on whether a bankruptcy will stay on your credit report or not. But if you have questions about that, John, just email me and I can give you some more information about that. Let's see. Eric Matthew said, will Steve be there at the legalese? Yes, Steve should be there. And Robert asked, when we're talking about these collectors, would that include utility company? It's a great question. It seems like more of the utility companies are on, for example, let me just share my screen real quick here. We see more of it on this NCTUE and some of these other sort of alternative collectors, but we do see it on the sort of the regular credit bureaus, okay? Where it gets a little confusing, talking about, who will be on sort of your normal credit reports. Like you may see Verizon on there only when you go into default, which is, I think, a problem for them. But they may also send it to Enhanced Recovery out of Jacksonville, Florida, and they may be on your credit report. Okay. So sometimes it's the collector, sometimes it's the quote original creditor. I don't see on most credit reports, Equifax, Experian, Trans Union, I don't see like, hey, you're $50 late to the gas company or the water company. Okay, that's going to be more on that specialty report. But sometimes we do see, if it's a little bit more significant amount, it will be on there. And so let's talk about kind of what we're doing here. And I'll tell you what I thought about doing, and then I changed my mind. We'll see if this works out. My original plan was I was going to have a download for you guys, sort of a checklist, like do step A, step B, C, D. But then I thought, actually, let's not do it that way. Let me just sort of walk you through the mindset, the theory behind this. And then you can make your own sort of checklist or flow chart. And you have a couple options if you do that. One, you can just keep it to yourself, okay? Or, and this is what I would recommend, what I'd like you to do is if you make it, send it to me. And, I may make some tweaks to it, and then let me share it with the group. I do that for two reasons. One, three reasons. One, this is not particularly an area of my talent, okay? I have a very narrow range of talent, okay? And, excuse me, and making, checklists, flow charts, that's not really my area of expertise. So I'm sure some of you guys are much better at that than me. Second reason is if you'll do this and send it to me and, so I can share it with the group, you'll help other people. Look, I'm doing this webinar. I don't charge you guys anything. I could charge money for these on a monthly basis or per webinar. I don't do that. I'm trying to give back. I'm trying to help. And so this is something you could do as well so that we together we can all get a little smarter. The final thing is sort of more selfish is not the right word, personal for you. If you will take the information from this webinar and then create your own chart, you'll know it so much better. If we want to really learn something, we teach it, okay? And so I want to see kind of how you approach it. I have an idea of how to make it, but I want to see what you guys come up with. And then, next week, if you send it to me before next week, I can look at it and share that with the group. And I think that will help all of us to get better. And the more involved you are in this, the more you will learn. When I teach classes, so I teach Bible classes at church, I teach classes to groups of lawyers for continuing education. I dislike lecture, okay? It's the most efficient way to teach, but I think it's not very effective. I much prefer to do back and forth, question and answer. It's a little harder in this context, okay? As we're kind of doing it by chat. But the more we can make this where it's interactive, kind of like the last 2 weeks, we'd put up something on the screen and say, okay, where are the errors here? And you guys would type stuff in. And there were things that you typed in that I had seen, things you typed in I had not seen. So we all got a little bit smarter, maybe a lot smarter doing that. So I really enjoyed that. And so I encourage you, take what we're going to go through today. And if you have talent in making a flow chart or a checklist, do that. And let's all get a little bit better at this. So let's talk about, what we do. So when I'm going through with a client and we're looking at their credit reports and we see some collection accounts on there, here's kind of the mindset. And as we go through this, this is what you would put into a flow chart, a checklist, et cetera. The first thing that I do is I ask the client, and we'll make up an example. We'll say it's enhanced recovery. It's a debt collector out of Jacksonville, Florida. And this is for DirecTV or AT&T, same thing. And so my first question to my client is, do you think you owe that debt? Now, it might not be the exact amount, but do you think you owe anything to DirecTV or AT&T? And if they say no, I say, well, why do you think you don't owe it? Say, well, I returned the equipment. I've got the receipt. I've got the last bill that says, you had a $27 credit. Then they mailed me a check for $27. They've got really strong proof. Other times they just say, I ended my agreement. I moved across town. I got AT&T again. They said my account's in great standing. And other times they say, well, yeah, I do owe that. It's a $50 copay to a doctor. And I remember not paying that. Or other times it's, I just don't know. So what I often recommend people do is just pick up the phone. Call the original creditor. So call AT&T, call the medical office, but we'll just use AT&T for right now. And, and you have to decide for yourself what you want to do. I'm telling you, for my clients, what I advise them to do is when they call, if the phone says, Please be advised, all calls may be recorded or monitored for quality control purposes. Hey, AT&T is saying that all calls may be recorded, so you can record it. Now, again, you have to make your own decision on that. But you record the call, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what's the point of the call? Well, the point of the call is very simple. You talk with AT&T and you say, hey, somebody claims I owe them some money to you guys. Do you show that I owe you any money? Do you show that I'm delinquent? I'm behind. There's something that I owe you. And probably a third, maybe 50% of the time, the answer comes back, no, you don't owe anything. And a lot of times that's followed by, as a matter of fact, your account is in such great standing. We have a wonderful offer for you right now. If you would, bundle your internet and your cable, and we'll give you $100 prepaid Visa gift card. And could I switch you to somebody to go through those terms and get you set up today? Okay. So now, whether you want the service or not, that's, up to you. But let's think about what happened. So if we recorded that, or if we can't record it, we document it, just by hand, or we type notes, whatever it is. We have the original creditor saying, you owe nothing. Okay. You owe nothing. So now what does that mean? Here you have enhanced recovery saying you owe $100 to AT&T, but AT&T says you don't owe us anything. Well, how do you square those away? Well, who would know better if you owe the money? Would it be AT&T or would it be enhanced recovery? Well, it'd be AT&T. They're the ones that know. And so if they say you owe nothing is my view. So what does that mean about enhanced recovery? That means they are saying publicly through the credit reporting, probably through a letter, maybe through phone calls, that you owe $100. Well, is that true? If AT&T says you do not owe $100, is it true for enhanced recovery to say you owe $100? Tell me what you think about that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up something I want to show you, just a little bit of the FDCPA. So again, think about this situation. We have AT&T says you owe nothing, but the debt collector says you owe $100. Now, is that true that you owe $100? And, Warren says, yeah, I don't owe the money. If AT&T says I don't owe the money, I don't owe the money. And I think that's absolutely right. So let's look at, this is section 1692E. And so false or misleading representations, the debt collector, so enhanced recovery, be a debt collector, may not use any false, deceptive, or misleading representation with the collection of any debt. And then that's the general law. And then they say, let's give you some examples here, okay? Not limiting it to these examples, but these are some examples to help, understand this better. So look at E2, the false representation of the character, amount, or legal status of any debt. Well, if enhanced recovery says I owe $100 and the truth is I owe $0, sounds like a false representation as to character, the amount, the legal status. There is no legal status and there is no amount that I owe. And so in my view, they're violating the FDCPA. Now, if they are doing this through credit reporting, that would be E8, okay? That can violate that. Then we have E10, which is sort of a catch-all that just says any representation, false representation, or deceptive means. That would be a violation of the FDCPA. So just, again, keep in mind where we are. We see this account on our credit report. We go, do I owe AT&T? Let me call AT&T. And they say, no, you don't owe us any money. Well, that's a big problem for enhanced recovery, okay? And we'll talk about what we can do with them. Let me just say this about recording. There's a couple ways to record a call. One is you get an app on your phone. Usually it's a paid app, and you use it. I would just say this, whatever you do, test it out a couple of times. Can't tell you the number of times people say, John, I got this fantastic recording. They admit everything. I mean, we're going to kill them in this case. And I go, okay, let me listen to it. And it's completely silent, or it only has one side of the conversation. You got to test this stuff. What I actually prefer is just sort of an old school way. Use your cell phone, put it on speakerphone, and then use your tablet, use your laptop, use your spouse's phone, use the voice memo app, and record it on that other device. Again, test this. Make sure, okay, that you know how to record. Make sure you've got your microphone on, all that sort of stuff. But that's an easy way to do this, okay? So again, we're starting off, we say, do I owe the original creditor? We're not talking about whether the debt's disputed, whether the debt collector is calling us too many times, anything like that. We're just saying, do I owe the original creditor? Well, if I'm uncertain, I call the original creditor. And maybe if I'm certain, I call them also just to get the proof, okay, that recorded call if you choose to record it. Now, what if they say you don't owe the debt? What do you do with the debt collector? So I see that Tony said maybe send a verification or validation dispute letter to the debt collector. So that's certainly one option. You can send a letter. It could be sort of generic, hey, I dispute this debt. Or it could be, hey, I called AT&T on this date and time. Here's a link to my Google Drive, my Dropbox, whatever, that has the recording. You can go here and listen to it. Maybe you transcribe it. You can use, I use a service. Let me just show you this. If you don't use this, it's a pretty cool app. Let me share my screen. And so there is let's see. So you can use this on your iPhone, or I think it's for Android also. But if you record it, what it does, it just transcribes sort of in real time. And it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty accurate. So let's look and see how this is doing here. So, today is February 24th, 2022. There's a lot of chaos in the world with Russia and Ukraine. So, it does a pretty good job. All right. And so it's free, which is always nice. And so that is something that you may want to use just to sort of help you transcribe something. I frankly use it on my phone every day. It's the app I use the most on my phone, just when I want to sort of record my thoughts. Maybe I'm walking my dog and I think, oh, I need to do this in this case or that case. It's a very, very useful app. But the point is, you send a letter. This is one option. Send a letter to a debt collector saying, look, I talked with AT&T. Here's the time of the call, the date of the call. Here's a link to the call. Here's a transcript. And I want you to back off of this. Get it off my credit report. That's one option. If they don't do that, they got problems. Okay. Now, let's see. I got some questions about the name of the app. It is otter.ai. And it may only be for the iPhone, iOS, but certainly you can use it on your computer. And so it records the audio, and it records, transcribes. And what's kind of cool about it is, you go through the transcript and you double click on a word and it takes you right to that portion of the recording. So it's very useful. And let's see, Tanya says, yes, Otter works great. Yeah, it's just a really cool app. The free version gives you maybe like 600 minutes. I think I have the pro version because I literally use it all the time. And so let's go back. Remember, you called AT&T. They say you don't owe the debt. So what do you do with the debt collector? So one suggestion was you send them a validation or verification letter. What would be another option we would have? So it's on our credit report, and we have this debt collector saying we owe $100. What else could we do when AT&T has told us we do not owe that debt? So let's see. Okay, so looks like maybe Eric Matthew put, I'm assuming that's to Otter for Google there. Let's see. So Tony said we can do a CC. So let's just pop that up real quick. And just so we're all on the same page. So a CC letter is sometimes called a cease and desist or a refuse to pay. So let's get down to that. And so here's the text. If a consumer notifies the debt collector in writing, the consumer refuses to pay a debt, or the consumer wishes the debt collector to cease further communication, debt collector shall not communicate further. Okay. So that would be an option. We could say, hey, you know what? I don't want to ever hear from you again. So they should not contact you again, but that doesn't make it come off our credit report. So Fleury said, well, maybe we dispute with the credit bureaus. Well, that's an idea. We go to Equifax, Experian and Trans Union. Hey, enhanced recoveries on my credit report. It says I owe $100. I called AT&T on this date, this time. Here's a link to my Dropbox folder. Here's, a link to the transcript on Google Drive or wherever you put it. I don't owe them. They admitted I don't owe them any money. Get this off my credit report. Now, if they don't do that, then you may be able to sue the credit bureaus, may be able to sue enhanced recovery. So we could send a dispute letter to enhanced recovery, see what they do. We could send a refuse to pay or a cease and desist and see what they do. We could send a letter to the credit bureaus and say, hey, I don't owe this. Get it off my credit report. And so what would be another option here that you can think of? Let's see, Tanya and Robert say get in writing. Send copies to the CRAs. So that certainly, could work. But keep this in mind. Remember where we started. And let me pull this back up here. Should probably just leave this thing up. So we've got 1692E. And this says a debt collector cannot use any false, deceptive, or misleading representation, and that would include the amount. Well, this debt collector in our example said I owe $100 when I do not owe $100. That's a misrepresentation. We could just sue the debt collector, okay, and say you're collecting a debt that's not owed. Now, this is getting into a little bit of the details of the FDCPA, but what do you think the defense would be if the debt collector gets sued by us saying, hey, you reported, you wrote a letter saying I owe $100, and it turns out I don't owe any money to AT&T, and so I'm suing you. What do you think the debt collector would do? What would be their argument about why they should not have to pay you money damages, why they are not guilty of violating the FDCPA? And this is getting into a little, like I said, a little bit of kind of the weeds of the FDCPA, but I'm curious if something comes to your mind, and I'll just go through the comments. There's also the option to submit a CFPB complaint. Certainly could do that. We could threaten the debt collector and say, hey, you've paid me money, or I'm going to sue you because you violated the law. Or we could sue them. And Fleury pointed out, well, they may have purchased the debt. Normally on what we're talking about, telecommunications type debt, medical debt, they normally don't buy that debt, okay? So they're just saying they're collecting on it. Yeah, Ryan says they blame the original creditor and they would say, hey, AT&T told us that you owe this debt. And Ryan's absolutely right. They would claim bona fide error. Same thing, Warren Maxwell, bona fide error. So let's see here, without going too far into the weeds here. So we will look at, well, I tell you what, we'll look at this for a moment here. This is just on damages. So it's actual damages, and it can be up to $1,000 in statutory damage. So actual damages could be economic, could be emotional distress damages. And I won't go deep into bona fide error, but basically bona fide error is, hey, look, we have all these procedures in place to not violate the law, and it happened accidentally. And they would blame AT&T. They'd say, AT&T swore to us that you owe this debt. And that might be enough, but I'll say this. it is always easier for these guys to claim a bona fide error defense than to prove a bona fide error defense. Okay. So, I mean, so many times we sue the debt collectors. They say, John, we have a bona fide error defense. The original creditor told us this. And I say, great. I want you to prepare an affidavit, or we'll take your deposition, and I want you to throw that original creditor under the bus, and you blame everything on them, and they lied to you, and they tricked you, and they deceived you. And had they not done that, you never would have collected on this account. You certainly never would have put it on my credit report. And you're just angry at them for doing that. So put that in a sworn statement, or let me take your deposition. They go, well, I mean, it's a good client of ours. We don't really want to get crossways with AT&T. They send us 5,000 accounts a month, and maybe we don't need to get this involved. Maybe we could settle this. So a lot of times they back off of it, okay? But even if they can prove bona fide error defense and say, hey, it's all AT&T's fault. Well, what does that mean? It means AT&T's got some problems. Okay, we did a webinar, I don't know, maybe 3 months ago about AT&T has a phenomenal arbitration agreement. Okay, if you've got their debt collector throwing them under the bus, saying it's all AT&T's fault, AT&T lied to them, the only reason this appeared on your credit report is AT&T lied to them, they have a fantastic arbitration case. Okay, so sometimes for the bad guys to escape one area, it sort of proves our case in another area. Okay, so we could sue the debt collector. We could send a validation or dispute letter. We could do a CFPB complaint. We could go through the bureau. All of these are valid options. Okay, and you have to see for each particular circumstance which is the best approach. For you, I would suggest get with a consumer lawyer in your state who does this type of work to say, hey, should we do a dispute to the bureau? Should we just sue the collector? Should we do an arbitration case against AT&T? Should we do all the above? What should we do? And so I just really want to open your mind to this, to say, all right, you see that collection account. To me, the first thing is, do I owe it? Well, and sometimes this is from like 5 years ago. You're like, well, I didn't keep the receipt from the UPS store when I returned the box. Well, call AT&T or Charter or whoever. Or, you'd say, well, wait a minute, I had Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. That bill should have been paid. Well, call the medical office, call the hospital. Hey, what do you show on this? And, they go, oh, you owe this money. Well, did you turn in a claim for insurance? Well, we don't know. We'll call your insurance company. Hey, did they turn in a claim for, I had this x-ray in the emergency room on such and such date? And if they don't, if they say, no, it wasn't turned in, go back to the hospital, the doctor, and say, you didn't turn in the insurance claim. I want to see my records because I gave you my insurance card. And what you will find is a lot of times they'll say, you know what, actually, you don't owe anything to us. Well, now we're in that same situation with AT&T. Okay. So those are some options. Now, let's talk about what if you do send a dispute type letter to the debt collectors? What type? We've talked about, let me go back to our screen here. We've talked about for under section C, the CC, cease communication. So that's one option. I'll just tell you this. I usually save that for the last. Okay. And so if I'm writing a letter, normally it always says we dispute the debt or we dispute the amount. I just typically say we dispute the debt. And then we want to see what happens. Because once the debt collector knows that we dispute the debt, then when they update our report, which they're supposed to do every month, according to section E8, if they fail to communicate to the credit bureaus that the account is disputed, they violated the FDCPA. I mean, we always have those lawsuits going. Okay. So those are fine lawsuits. And I mean, every situation is different, but on these types of debts, we may have a client that owes, $100 and they may get, 30 times that amount, 40 times that amount in a settlement. So this is, it definitely can be very much worth your while to file one of these cases. Now, sometimes you don't have actual damages, but you still can get up to $1,000. It may be a $50 debt, but they violate the law when they don't mark the accounts disputed. Now, there's some strategy, and do you ask for documents or do you not ask for that? If you ask for documents, then they're allowed to send you those documents. One thing that I would add to this is, and if you were in our lengthy series on Regulation F, you remember we talked about, that's the new rules that went into effect November 30th of 21 for debt collectors. We talked about sort of the convenience factors. Now, that's always been in the law. Matter of fact, I'll show this to you. But we're allowed to say to the collector, here's how I want you to communicate with me. And here are the times that I want you to communicate with me. So we might say, hey, the only convenient way to communicate with me is by email and text, and only Monday to Friday, 6 to 9 p.m., or only Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. Central Time, or whatever it is. You decide when it's convenient for you. Do you like Coke or do you like Pepsi? It's your choice. Well, you can decide what's convenient. You may say, I'm going to run to a store to get some milk. Well, maybe it's not convenient for me today. Well, I might be in the same situation, say it's convenient. So convenience, my point is very, very personal with you. So if you say, I only want to hear from, collectors Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 a.m. to 11:45 a.m., I mean, you're the only one that knows whether it's convenient for you. And so you can put those restrictions on them, and that they violate those restrictions, we can sue them. This has really always been the law, but the Regulation F makes it very clear. We're not going to look at that. So I just want you to see this is always the law. At an unusual time or place, or a time or place known or which should be known to be inconvenient. And then they say, we presume that would be after 8 a.m. and before 9 p.m. local time at your location. But Regulation F makes it clear you can say, hey, only communicate by email or only by text message. And so you may not want to ask them for a bunch of documents. You may just want to say, look, I dispute this debt. And if you want to communicate with me only by email, only by text during these windows of time. Okay. Now, if you say they can write to you by mail, you can't limit the time because it doesn't work that way. But calling you, texting you, emailing you, you certainly can specify the times they can do that. So you may want to do a dispute letter that way. So it can be just, hey, I dispute this. Hey, I want you to give me documents that prove the amount. You may want to say, here are the only convenient times, or you may want to say a refuse to pay, that CC situation that we looked at down here, where you say, hey, I refuse to pay, and then they're not to communicate with you any further. So let me check our comments here. Let's see here. Murley says this applies to credit card debt also. If the original creditor removed the account due to FCRA lawsuit, some other debt collector shows up asking for money. So you have to be careful, Murley, on that to make sure that we're being very clear about there's a difference between something just coming off our credit report and whether or not we still owe it. So in the example we used with AT&T or with the doctor, the medical group, the hospital, is we're calling them saying, hey, do you show that I owe you any money? Now, you could call Capital One or Discover Card, ask them same question. I'll say this, it's very unlikely they're going to say, no, you don't owe the money, okay? It's very common in the telecommunications, cell phone, cable, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I'll say this, I've moved around a decent amount in the last 5-6 years. I think every time I have moved, I've turned in the cable box or the router box, whatever. I want to say every time the company has said, you owe us money. And I call them and I go, look at your records. I don't owe you any money. And they go, yeah, you're right. You don't owe us any money. Sorry about that. And it's sort of a scam. Okay. And certainly with medical billing, there's just all sorts of chaos with that. Okay. So this is more effective when you're dealing with medical bills, cell phone bills, cable, internet type stuff. Let's see. What else do we have here? Florrie said, how about insurance companies? Yeah, I think that's really for medical bills. Yeah, same thing. If the doctor or the medical group says you owe this money, and say with your insurance that you had at the time, $50 is your copay, and they say you owe $77.25 for this office visit. And you're like, that doesn't make sense. I had insurance then. Did you guys even submit it? And sometimes they'll say, well, we think we did, but you owe the money. You call, Blue Cross, Humana, whoever your group is. Do they submit a bill or a claim? Because under a lot of state laws, if they don't submit the claim, then you may not owe the debt. Okay. Now you have to check your state law on that, but it certainly can give you an argument here. Okay. So, the sort of the big picture is, go to the creditor, go to whoever would know whether or not you owe this debt, and ask them, because surprisingly, a lot of times they'll tell you, no, you don't owe it. Let's see. Tanya says, put restrictions on letters as to when a debt collector can or cannot call or email, and they don't abide, then are they in violation? Yes, that's my position. They violate the FDCPA. So if you say, only email me from 1 to 5 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they email you on Tuesday, you violated the law. It's inconvenient. You told them it was inconvenient. It would be like this. And we had these cases, 15 years ago. We might work shift work. And so, we come home and we go to bed at 8 o'clock, and then we get up at 4 o'clock. And then we go in, at 11 o'clock at night. Well, we may tell the debt collector, look, I'm working shift work. Do not call me during the day. I mean, I'm trying to sleep. It's hard enough to sleep during the day. Don't call me during the day. Guess what? They call you during the day, you sue them. Okay. If they call you at work and you say, I'm not allowed to get these kind of calls at work, and they call you again, you sue them. Okay. So that is my simple approach. And when I say sue them, I mean, you talk with the lawyer, make sure it makes sense to do that, but that's a violation almost always. So let's see. Warren says, when you do a CC letter, do you also tell them you dispute the debt? So Warren, this is a great question. And there's a difference of opinion on this. Some lawyers say, if you're doing a CC, so that's section 1692 CC, that refuse to pay or cease communications, do not also say you dispute it. The fear is if you say you dispute it, that gives them the right to contact you about your dispute. I do both. I put it, if I'm communicating with the debt collector, I'm saying I dispute the debt. I've had one debt collector raise this, and they said, John, we don't owe you any money because you said you disputed the debt, and we have the right to mail you a letter with proof of the debt, and here's an opinion from the FTC from 1997, and I read the opinion. It totally different situation, and I called the lawyer. I just kind of laughed and said, okay, then don't pay me any money. I mean, you're so confident that you didn't do anything wrong. Don't pay any money. He's like, well, make us an offer. I go, no. I'd feel terrible if you paid me money when you don't think you owe it. And he's like, John, please, we want to pay you money. So, I have not had a problem with it, but there is at least a concern among some lawyers that you should split those up. Okay. Yeah. For me, I just put them in the same thing, but it's a decision that you have to make. So John says, if debt collectors call and just hang up, isn't that still a TCPA violation since they called your cell phone? So it's going to be dependent on whether they used an auto dialer, and you mentioned that in your comment. Problem is that the issue of an auto dialer has really been gutted by the courts. Okay, it's very hard to prove that. Now, if it's pre-recorded message and they never had consent to call your cell phone, in other words, you didn't give consent to the original creditor, you may have a TCPA claim. But those are, I'll just say those are challenging if you don't have the facts lining up just right. So Tanya says, can we combine a refuse to pay with the cease, stop communicating letter? And if they do so, are they in violation? So a refuse to pay really is a cease communication. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So let me pop this up and we'll just look at this to kind of be precise on this. So if you say, I refuse to pay, the debt collector shall not communicate further, and then it does give some exceptions. It's basically, hey, we're leaving you alone. Here's what we might do to you, or here's what we're planning on doing to you. If you notify them in writing that you want them to cease further communication, it's the same thing. Debt collector shall not communicate further. So you could put both in there. You could say, I refuse to pay, and I want you to cease communication. But really, you just need to do one of those. Okay. But there's no harm in doing both. So, and if they then communicate other than these three exceptions here, hey, we're terminating. Hey, we may invoke these remedies that we ordinarily invoke. So in other words, they might say, well, we might sue you, or we might, do something with your property, or whatever it might be. Or number three, here's what we specifically intend to do. They can tell you that, but outside of that, they violate the law by communicating with you. So let's see. Eric Matthews says, normally after invalidation letters, further communications be by U.S. mail. Does USPS or UPS or FedEx equal U.S. mail? I would say this. I think a judge would say, if you ask that it be by mail, if they did it overnight, that would be fine. Okay. So really what you're doing is you're asking them to communicate in writing to you. Now, how that gets delivered, is it certified mail? Is it first class? Is it UPS? Is it FedEx? I personally, I've never had that issue come up, but I don't think a judge would be particularly concerned about that. Let me stop our sharing here. And so let's see. Kevin says, how should I handle a medical claim from August 2019 car wreck? Didn't know anything about it until the collection agency posted a credit report February 1st. Original creditor did not provide necessary coding initially. So one thing I would say is, if it's February 1st of this year, under Regulation F, they're supposed to communicate, the debt collector is, before they credit report. And so that may be a violation of the FDCPA, what they did, if they did not communicate with you. But I would kind of go back the same process we talked about. You call the doctor, the hospital. Did you guys turn this in to insurance? And sometimes with car wrecks, it can be a little bit different. There may be what's called a hospital lien. There may be this being paid by the medical payments portion of your auto insurance, or it may be your health insurance that pays it. But, if there was a mistake made in how they coded it or sent it to the doctor, or the insurance company, then, I would confront them about that. You guys didn't do it right. You had my insurance information. Why do you think I'm responsible when you messed up and didn't do this right? What I have found is they usually will back off of that. Okay. And you may have a state law that requires them to back off of that. And then, depending on how things have gone, you may want to dispute that with the collector as well and say, how do you think I owe this money when the original creditor refused to turn this into my insurance policy? And again, that tends to make the collectors kind of nervous, because usually these bills are not big. It might be $500. Well, do they want a $5,000 lawsuit, because medical billing didn't get handled right? Usually not. Okay. Let's see. Eric says, call the insurance company, they'll help you sort who the people you need to contact are. And sometimes they wait too long to submit it to health insurance. And that's where a lot of times state laws come in and say, hey, if they don't submit it on time, then they may have waived their claim. Okay. Now, if this was being submitted like to State Farm under your car insurance policy, you may need to figure out, well, who dropped the ball? Was it the doctor? Was it State Farm? And kind of figure this out and then explain that maybe to the collector or the credit bureaus and see if you get some help there. John said, in regards to debt collectors calling my cell, From what I know, the only debt to collect is past statute of limitation. Could that be a violation as they're trying to collect a debt no longer collectible? So great question. I would say you really have to understand 3 time periods, okay? So the very first time period, statute of limitation. What does that mean? That means the time period to sue you. That's all it means, nothing else, the time period to sue you. The second time period is the time period to credit report. So sometimes this is called the obsolescence period. Usually it's 7 years from when you defaulted on the underlying debt. And then the third time period is the time period just to collect, to write you, to email you, text you, call you. Generally, that's unlimited. But various states require sometimes, if they're contacting you after the statute of limitations has expired, to notify you of that. And where they really get in trouble is they'll call you and you talk to them on the phone. They say, well, you need to take care of this, John. Now, if you don't take care of this, we're going to take some steps. We're going to take some action. And, I hate to see you have your wages garnished. Well, you can't really have your wages garnished unless they get a judgment. Can't get a judgment unless they sue you. They can't sue you. The statute of limitations has expired. So sometimes when remember, we got statute of limitations, credit report period, and then just general collection. Sometimes when they're over here, it's very, very dangerous for them. And they will break the law. And when they break the law, you sue them. So you want to be very precise about if you have a conversation with them or they leave a voicemail, let's see what they actually say. But if they're just calling, not leaving a voicemail, in most states, not every state, but most states, that would not be a violation. There may be 1 or 2 states where if you go beyond the statute of limitation, that does expire the debt or extinguish the debt. That may be different, but I know Alabama's not that way. Maybe it's Louisiana, maybe one other state, but just check with the consumer lawyer in your state. Let's see. Kevin said, I think the debt we were talking about is $1,400. That's a pretty good amount of debt. I would just see about these insurance companies and that sort of thing. All right. So John says, in regards to debt collector calling me and hanging up, aren't they also supposed to send a letter within 10 business days after their first call? It's hard because they just hung up, but there's proof from their number. So it's 5 days from the first communication. So then we have to go back and say, well, what's a communication? So generally just calling without leaving a message won't be a communication. And under Regulation F, there is something called the limited content message that may not be considered a, quote, communication. So it gets a little detailed. So it's not just any call. There has to be some communication. It could be a phone call. It could be a letter. But I would just remind you under Regulation F, before they credit report on you, they are supposed to chat with you or send you a letter, or it could be an email. Let's see. John said, Macy's accounts past statute of limitations, so my credit report another year. Thinking of doing a pay for delete. Should I email them to get this proof in writing or send them a letter? So it's a great question. And this sort of will, I think, finish our talk for today. And then I'll try to grab any remaining comments. So what if you call AT&T and they say you owe the debt and you're like, I just saw the box in my garage, but maybe you disagree on the amount. So you dispute it and you check your credit report and it's been updated to show disputed. So there's no violation there. Maybe then you do a refuse to pay and they don't communicate with you, the debt collector. So in other words, there's no violation of the law. Then you could do a pay for delete where you call the company and say, hey, I want to talk about settling this. And when you talk about settling it with them, what I suggest for my clients anyway, you obviously make your own decision, is I don't bring up the pay for delete. Just say, hey, we want to talk about settling this. And so if you sort of visualize this situation, imagine you're in a room and you're on this side of the table, they're on this side of the table, and it's $100. That's the settlement amount. And they say, well, you have to pay us $100 for us to settle. And it's kind of like you start to slide over the money, but you have your hand on it. And when they reach for it, you pull it back, you say, but you have to delete it. Well, now some of them will say, oh, we won't delete it. We won't delete it. I just had a conversation with a lawyer today where his client said, oh, it's, be wrong for us to delete something. It's not. Okay. But that's what they told him. So sometimes they won't delete it. But a lot of times if it's, they see the money and it's kind of like they're reaching for it. And then you say, and you have to delete it. Suddenly they can delete it. Sort of like walking out of a car dealership, wait. I just talked with my sales manager. We can come down another $500. Maybe not in this supply chain time period, but normal time period. So that's what I would do. Again, if when you call the debt collector, they say, please be advised, all calls may be recorded. Or maybe they answer the phone and they say, hey, this is Susie on a recorded line. Who do I have the pleasure of speaking with? Well, they consent to it being recorded. So again, you have to make your own decision. For my clients, I tell them to record that. If they tell you, hey, you pay us $100 by this date, made payable here, or you pay it by phone, or whatever the details are, get all the details. Who are you paying? How much? What form? What date? And they say, if you do all that, we'll delete the account. And you do all that and they don't delete the account, we have it recorded. So we know they lied. Okay. Remember, any misrepresentation. So they lied about telling you they would delete the account to get you to pay the money. So we sue them for that. Okay. Now you might also dispute it through the credit bureaus. Again, put on Dropbox link, put that in your letter, your online dispute, however you do it. You go listen to the audio. They won't. Okay. They send this over to India. 2 of the bureaus do, and they're not going to listen to your recording. Okay. Hey, here's a transcript of they're not going to read it. Okay. But send it to them, because then when they ignore it and they don't fix this, they don't delete it, and you sue the bureaus, you sue the debt collector, it's sort of a pathetic excuse to say, well, we don't like our outside vendors who actually do the investigation to actually listen to anything or read anything. Like, we're opposed to them actually knowing what the dispute's about. Not a very persuasive argument. Okay. So that's how I would handle it. Now you could also ask them to email you, to send you a letter. You could confirm it by a letter, but if you have it recorded, in my mind, that's a very good situation. All right, let's see what else we've got. MSB is a debt collector company, keeps writing my wife about a debt I've already paid. I've sent them dispute letters, sent receipts of the paid toll to Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, even though they say they don't credit report. Is this a violation? So here's the challenge. A lot of courts say a toll booth violation is not a consumer debt. If it's not consumer debt, the FDCPA, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, does not apply. Okay, so you have to look that up. It seems like I've had that come up one time, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And at least in my circuit, the 11th Circuit, my memory is they said that is not a debt covered by the FDCPA. So you may have some state law that can help you. If they're collecting a debt that's not owed, maybe some state law can help you. If it's not on the credit report, then you may just want to write to them and say, look, we refuse to pay this. We've already paid it. Leave us alone. Maybe file something with CFPB, with your state attorney general, and see if you can't back them off. Let's see. John says, should I call a debt collector, find out who they're trying to collect for, and record it? You can. Again, obviously you have to make your own judgment on, is it legal to record? But what I'm talking about in this webinar is really, it's on your credit report. And Equifax sometimes doesn't tell you, but Trans Union and Experian normally will tell you who this collector is actually collecting for. Okay. So, but if you have any questions, you could call them, you could write them, hey, you've got a $75 collection account on my credit report. Who are you collecting for? Let's see. Ken says, would updating on the credit report be considered communication after the CC letter was sent? I don't think so. Typically, it's communication to you as opposed to communication to somebody else. In other words, they can talk to their lawyer If it's a debt collector, they can talk to the original creditor. And I think they can talk to the credit bureau. I'm not sure I've ever had that specifically come up, but that would be, my belief as to how the courts would rule on that. Let's see. Murley says, discuss credit reporting issues based out of Illinois. Murley, reach back out to me on that, and we could do a quick call. I always encourage people, find a lawyer in your state that does this type of work. But if you can't, then, there are times when I'll talk with people in another state, and because we may be able to bring that lawsuit in Alabama, we may be able to get a lawyer in your state to get us admitted to your state for that particular case. So there are some options there, but I always start with the beginning point of try to find a consumer lawyer in your state. That's the easiest approach, but sometimes it doesn't work out. So, I'll be glad to help any way I can. Let's see. John said, what's fair amount to offer for a $500 amount for pay for delete? Their standard. There's really not. I wish I could tell you there is. It really depends. It depends on the time of year. Okay. It depends on the circumstances. So let's think about it. We're recording this on February 24th. So we're kind of in the tax refund season. They tend to offer a little better deals during tax refund. They know you're getting some money likely. We've got the chaos of, Russia is attacking Ukraine. I did not hear, I think maybe he was still speaking when we started this webinar. I don't know what Biden's plan is. What's the Western response to this? Are they going to say to Russia, we're cutting you off from the Western financial system, the SWIFT bank type platform? Are they going to ban all exports, imports to Russia? Are they going to make an exception for oil and natural gas, which would sort of be ironic? What's the response back from Russia about this? So I bring all that up, not to say, let's talk about the politics of it, but to say there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of uncertainty, and collectors recognize that, because when there's lots of uncertainty, and this is certainly not investment advice, but a lot of times people sort of sell from the market, it's stock market. They invest in gold. Sometimes Bitcoin can be sort of a type of gold or precious metals, although it doesn't always move that way. So if there's uncertainty in the world, if there's, inflation's raging out of control, gas prices are $5 a gallon, which I think they probably are in California, or will soon be. I think in the rest of the US, probably $4 a gallon pretty soon. Debt collectors have to take all this into account, and people may be more reluctant to part with their money to pay off this $500 debt. So you may get a better deal, sort of the more chaos there is, because people may sort of hold on to their money. And debt collector, they could go either way. They can say, well, we got to get more from you because the other people aren't paying us, or, hey, let's get what we can. So I would just start off with something small. You might offer them 10%, 20%, or see if they'll give you a number first. Hey, there's this $500 debt, I dispute that, but let's talk about settling it. What could I pay you today that you would take for it? They might say, well, $425. Wow, it's a little steep. I wouldn't plan on paying that much, assuming this is true. I got other debts to pay. Tell you what, I'll offer you $75, $100. Oh, we can never take that, but let me go talk with my manager. And then he, watches a quick YouTube video, pretends to talk to his manager, gets back on the phone with you. I went to bat for you, called in a bunch of favors. I got down to, $310. Oh, 310. You're just negotiating, and you just find the number where you guys can meet. But before you accept it, this is the way that I do it. You say, and I need you to delete this off my credit report. And if they say no, okay, they say no. But if they say yes, and you're comfortable with that amount, now you got it settled. Let's see. There's a question about any lawyers in Illinois. I don't I don't really, but I put up a link to consumeradvocates.org. And I tell you what, let's just go there and I'll show you this. So this is a consumer organization. Find an attorney. So come here, Illinois. You could also put in like Chicago or was it Bloomingfield? You can do different areas of practice. So you might say, Fair Credit Reporting Act, and then you search. And so we got David Phillips, Mary Phillips, there's a number of people here. So Ron is actually a lawyer in Huntsville, but he's licensed in Illinois, is my memory. And so, what I would suggest is, like I know Keith, he does a lot of class actions with TCPA. You click on one of these and, you can contact them. You can do that. You can go to their website, check them out, ask them questions, have you a list of questions and say, here's my situation. I wouldn't make it like 27 paragraphs. I'd just say, here's my situation. Here are my questions, and find the right lawyer for you. In my view, you only hire a lawyer when you feel absolutely confident in that lawyer and absolutely comfortable. Why do I say comfortable? Because this can be a long process. It can be a couple years, and there's, ups and downs, and there's judges rule in our favor. They rule against us, and good things happen, bad things happen. It's like a game, Super Bowl. Sometimes you disagree with the calls that are made, or sometimes you have, bad luck. So you need somebody that you feel comfortable with sort of walking down this path, because it can be a long path to do one of these cases. And I just realized that I did not share my screen. I apologize for that. So let me just show you here. So this is a lawyer there. If we put in Illinois Fair Credit Reporting Act, there's 24 lawyers that come up, and you can contact them. So if you go to that link that I clicked on and just say search, then it'll come up with these lawyers, and then just reach out to them. So let's see. John said, this is going back to the pay for delete, and we'll wrap this up here in just a moment. Since past statute of limitation, they might take a smaller amount. Sometimes they will. Sometimes, though, it's sort of principle. They say, we're not going to take less than X percent. So, part of their thinking is that they leave it on your credit report, it might hurt you enough where you have to pay them the full amount to get it off of your credit report. So sometimes they use that sort of as extortion. Let's see. Andre said, you sent some stuff to me. Yeah, Andre, let me check on that. We had a jury trial, and then I've had some sort of family medical issues. So, and plus we had had a bunch of smaller trials. So let me check on that to see. So just, if you will, reach out to me, by email, and let's talk about that. And let's see, Merle asked about Ron's number. Let me pull that up here. So Ron is a good guy. I'm not as familiar with him doing FCRA. He does a lot of bankruptcy and FDCPA, and maybe he does Fair Credit Reporting Act. But you certainly could reach out to him. He works a lot with David Phillips, who was on that list. And again, David does a lot with FDCPA, may do stuff with FCRA. I'm not sure. Let's see. So this will be our final one. George says, what if the company says, yes, they'll delete it, and then they don't delete it? Well, then I would sue them because they lied. Okay. And now, again, you might sue them directly. You might dispute that with the credit bureaus and put the recording in. You might do a dispute directly to the collector and say, hey, on this day, this phone number, this 12-minute and 17-second call, you guys told me if I paid $100 within 7 days, paid it online, you would delete this. I paid it, 5 days later, paid $100, you haven't deleted it. See what they do. So there's different strategies, but if they lied to you, they got problems. Okay, lots of problems. Let's see. Glenn says, what's your position? You become disabled, can't pay your debts. I would talk with the creditors and say, hey, here's my situation. And they may work something out with you. You really need to, I think, meet with somebody, consumer lawyer, maybe a bankruptcy lawyer, and say, here's my situation. And, what's at risk? Okay, so let me give you two sort of opposite ends. Let's say that we have Bob, who has $1 million house in Alabama, and we have a $15,000 homestead exemption. Okay, so in Florida, it's like unlimited. And so what if I get sued? Well, they can't take your Social Security, disability payments, but they can seize your house and sell it. Now, what if the person, Susie's in the same position, except she rents, she doesn't own any assets. She's got a different risk factor. What if somebody's in Florida, where I don't practice in Florida, but I think there's a homestead exemption, sort of like unlimited. Okay, so that's why you'll see some celebrity like $8 million bankruptcy and they keep their $3 million house. Okay, so you kind of have to know your risk. What can they get from you? Are you expecting money coming in? Okay, so then you can decide, okay, well, does it make sense for me to maybe take extraordinary steps to try to get this paid? Maybe you reach into your 401k. Maybe you borrow against that, or it's all different options. But obviously, we want to pay the bills that we legitimately owe. If you're unable to do that, I would get with the creditors, explain the situation, see what they can do to help you. So let's see. John says, great webinar. Hey, you thanks for being here. Thanks for all the questions. Let's see. Tanya, thanks for teaching these webinars. Hey, I appreciate all you guys being here. And so we'll look. I'm not sure exactly what we'll do next week. Maybe if we start getting in some of these sort of alternative credit reports, we'll do that. Or maybe we'll just do an open-ended, Q&A. But and if there's anything specific you want, just email me and let me know. And you guys have a fantastic day. And if you're free and you haven't had more of me than you can stand, then 4 o'clock Central Time, just go to my YouTube channel and there'll be a live video there with Stephen Palmieri and probably Blaine Dixon from Tennessee, consumer protection lawyer from Tennessee. So you guys have a great one. And remember this. If you can, take what we talked about. I know it was, kind of a lot of stuff, but think about that and sort of put that into a flowchart. It'll help you learn this so that if you're dealing with this, it won't just be, oh yeah, I heard somebody say something, but it'll be deep in here and you'll have it in written form. And if you want to send that to me, then, I can share that with the group next week and say, hey, here's a little flowchart or checklist, basically, do you owe the creditor? Can you call the creditor? Do you do a dispute letter? Different types of dispute letters to the collector. Do you do pay for delete? Do you sue the collector? So anyway, just take a shot at that. And it might be that, we sort of put a couple of these together and we get something really useful out of that. So I will see you guys next week if I don't catch you at 4 o'clock, and you guys have a good one.